everyone has a story. Where have you come from? Why are you here? Where are you going? These questions lie at the heart of what it means to be human. And when we pause and listen carefully, we find that the answers can have profound implications on all of our lives. Welcome. This is True Stories.
I grew up in a Christian home, and my parents told me that one of the reasons we started going to church was when I was around 8 years old or so. I had questions that were essentially too big for them to know what to do with. Like, I asked questions like, who created God? And my mom was like, I don't know what to do with that question. And so we started going to church, and from there I was involved with the youth group. I probably grew up in a church not necessarily exactly like the Spring, but it was small. It was a church plant, and so I remember church gatherings being in my parents' backyard and running around with friends and having this good sense of community. And so I've always been attracted to situations like that. The reason I touch on that first part of questions is I think that is something that has been just very consistent in my life. I think that there is this existential wrestle I've carried with me my entire life that I'm maybe kind of coming a bit more to terms with in my 30s. And it's just been kind of interesting for me to look back on, I think I was maybe kind of wired this way from the time that I was 8 years old, is kind of to ask these questions. I think I'm definitely in the middle of that existential wrestle, maybe more than I ever have been before. I think it's now I feel like a bit more of a confrontation with it lately, and I think because where I am now, I don't really have much curiosity over what my life is going to look like, and I think this is something that a lot of people go through probably in their 20s and 30s. You're always kind of on to the next thing that as you're growing up, you go to high school, and then you go to college, and then you get a job, and you just have all these big questions to answer. Who am I going to marry? What am I going to do? Am I going to stay at this job? And I think this is one of the first times in my life that I have been very settled into something for a significant amount of time, with kind of the knowledge that I'm not going anywhere, that this is my life, and is it the way I want it to be? Is it serving God well? Does this help me live well and follow Jesus well? And I think maybe where those two kind of relate is that in some ways I feel a little bit less in process now, that there's a little bit less of I'm figuring it out, and I kind of feel this thing with God that's we are here, what are you going to do now? I feel really good about what I'm doing right now. I love doing therapy with people. I love being a therapist. I love hammering out the hard questions of life with people. So I think there's kind of a heaviness there that allows me to connect well to people. But I do therapy all day, and then I leave, and a lot of times I'm still kind of wrestling over it. And so it's a struggle to kind of reconnect into just kind of the presence of my life as well. And I think I don't think I've really figured that out yet, and maybe it's something you don't ever quite figure out, but I definitely don't feel I'm existentially wrestling all the time. I sit down at dinner with friends and laugh, and just this is good, and not everything needs to come back to what is the point. I think that's not a good way to live, and it's not necessarily that questions like that aren't true or don't matter, but they just they only serve you so well to such an extent. I think I kind of know that will morph someday, and I'm not exactly sure what that will morph into. Sometimes I wish that my life could meet therapy a little bit more, that I could do some of what I do, not necessarily in my office, but more on my porch. So I know that will morph someday, but I do know that, like, for now, like, I like what I'm doing, and I like getting to be in this office, although usually I don't sit on this side of the office. I think as well, like, God is maybe just kind of like calling me back a little bit more and asking me to kind of just like sit with him and walk with him a bit more, and not be as quite as like externally focused in terms of like, you know, what am I doing for these other people and what am I supposed to be doing, but just kind of like spending time with him. When Jesus was here on earth, like, that's what he did. Like, he spent time with people in like kind of like a slow and intimate way. He wasn't like on the run and doing the next thing, like, okay, we got to get to these people, you know, like, come on, like, all right, we have 2 hours here and then we're going here. And so I'm kind of enjoying just like being in 2020 and being 32.